So when I was in 8th grade, I was brought to an after-school Bible study, and I was a little scared because I was walking into a room of kids, friends of mine, who I picked on. I made fun of them specifically for going to church, and it was this thing where I just needed to go, and I was not only worried about what they might think or say to me, but I was also worried about the youth pastor who was leading this Bible study, and I had met him a couple of years earlier, but I hadn't been to church for a while because I didn't like church, and as I mentioned, I picked on kids for going to church, and I was just scared because I'm like, it's one thing to deal with kids, but this is a grown man who I've he knows that I've probably said some not very nice things about him, and and so I walk in the room and he sees me and he remembered my name, and he jumped over a couch, ran across the room and said, "Justin." And it was like this moment where he said, "I'm so glad you're here." And it was a crazy moment, and it flipped the script. It really caught me by surprise. And it was I didn't really understand everything at that moment. I didn't really have words for what was happening right then and there, but I look back and I realized that he had blessed me with this gift of grace, and this gift of actually like kind of grace-filled hospitality, that he would welcome someone like me into a space that I had ridiculed, right? And I look back at that moment and I couldn't have foreseen that right then and there, but I look back and I realized that was a moment that changed my life. It was a moment that offered this grace that I hadn't experienced, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And this morning we're going to look at the gift that we see in Mark 15. And I invite you to consider, have you experienced something in your life where you've received a gift that changed everything? Maybe it's a relationship with someone, maybe it's an act of service, or maybe it's something tangible that someone gave you that led you down a new path of hobby or lifestyle, whatever it is. But consider if you have received something so beautiful and something so life-changing that you were never the same. Because I think the text that we're going to look at this morning is a text that outlines a gift from God. It's a gift from God to the world that changes everything. This is Mark 15, starting with verse 16. The soldiers led him, Jesus, into the courtyard of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole cohort. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him. And they began saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews." They struck his head with a reed, spat upon him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him out of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. And then they led him out to crucify him. If you're joining us for the first time this week, we've spent the last few months going through the Gospel of Mark, and the Gospel of Mark is this powerful declaration of who God is, and that Jesus is in fact God's Son. And here we're at the point in the story where Jesus has led his ministry. He has taught beautiful things. He's done powerful things. And people have their hopes that he will lead them to freedom, that he will be the agent of God's kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. And then some weird things start happening. He starts to get abandoned. He starts to get betrayed. And then he's arrested. And he is brought before the religious leaders. And he declares blasphemy. He declares that he is God. And then he's brought before the Roman authorities. And the Roman authorities, in concert with the Jewish authorities, realize that they may be two people groups in conflict with one another, but what they can agree on is that this Jesus fella has got to go. And so Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified. And that's where we are this morning. The soldiers led him into that courtyard, and they They began saluting him sarcastically and mockingly. "Hail, King of the Jews." They struck his head, spat upon him, knelt him down in homage to him. And they strip him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him. And they let him out to be crucified. As they're going, they compel a passerby who was coming in from the country to carry his cross. It was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Then they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his clothes among them, casting lots to decide what each should take. So if we remember, we've read through the Gospel of Mark, and earlier in this gospel, Jesus has this moment where he outlines what it means to be a follower of him, where he says, deny yourself and take up your cross. Lose your life for my sake, and you'll find it, right? And then as he continues his ministry and he finds himself going to Jerusalem, and there's great hopes that people have in him, and then he's arrested and he's moving toward his torture, and he's moving toward his crucifixion. We see all those who are around him, some abandon him, some betray him, and now some are mocking him. And the very thought of someone following Jesus to the cross is almost out of the question. And yet here we see, and I think many scholars would agree that here Simon ends up embodying the role of the true disciple. That whether or not he knew what he was doing or voluntarily did what he was doing, what is he doing? He is taking up Jesus's cross. He's taking up his cross. And whether he realizes it or not, he's succeeding where all others have failed. Simon here becomes the true disciple. So it continues, Mark 15. It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified two bandits, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads, saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests, along with the scribes, were also mocking him among themselves, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross now, so that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also taunted him. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. At 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, "Listen, he is calling for Elijah." And someone ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." And then Jesus gave a loud cry and breathed his last. So we have this moment in Mark's gospel where Jesus is led to the cross. And here, in very succinct terms, Mark describes what happens. And he doesn't go into as much detail as the other gospel accounts do. And I think, again, we've talked about this before, there is a time and a place to take in the whole concert of Scripture, and in this case, the whole concert of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and to see how they complement one another and to see how they present this unifying vision of who Jesus is with their unique voices. There's a time and a place for that, but what we're trying to do with this series is to sit and just to sit with Mark alone as Mark's gospel presents the story of who Jesus is. And here, there's not much of a focus on the crucifixion. I mean, there is a focus, obviously, but there isn't much detail surrounding it. And one of the things that I think is important is that, again, time and time throughout Mark's gospel, there's this invitation as the reader, as the audience of this gospel, hearing it, reading it, whatever it may be, this invitation to see ourselves as the disciples, to see ourselves as the people surrounding Jesus, questioning who he is, wondering what he'll do next, figuring out how we might live into the commands, the invitations that he presents. And in light of that, when we look at this chapter and the chapter before in Mark, we realize that there's an invitation. There is this sort of challenge to see ourselves as this whole cohort, right? Again, at the beginning of the reading this morning, the soldiers led him to the courtyard of the palace, and they called together the whole cohort. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns, they saluted him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." And we see that the context here, the makeup of this cohort, the whole cohort, is this combination of both the Jewish people, the Jewish authorities, and the Roman authorities, that all the people had come together and to mock him. And it's important for us to see that, because here, when we read this text, it's so easy for us to read looking back and think, how could they do that to Jesus? But that is to miss the point of Mark's gospel. Mark is inviting us to see the ways in which we ourselves, we are that whole cohort. We are the ones mocking Jesus, that all are guilty. The Jewish, the Roman, everyone involved has blood on their hands. In verse 29, where it says they derided him, the word that's used there, this sort of e blasphemun, the Greek that's used, it carries this double meaning, where it was a word that could be used to be translated derided or sort of mocked or scorned, but it was also, it's the same word that's used in reference to blaspheming God. And so here in Mark, the writer has this powerful sort of double meaning with that moment, where in verse 29 it says they passed by and they derided him. And so they mocked the human Jesus, but also there's this acknowledgement again that we see in verse 1, where Jesus is the Son of God. And so not only were they mocking and deriding him, but those who passed by blasphemed him. And they blasphemed God in the flesh, who was journeying toward the cross on their behalf. And that we see ourselves as those mocking him and deriding him. And we ourselves are the ones who blaspheme him on his way to the cross. That's the challenge, to see ourselves. And we think about the broader context of these chapters, where there's Judas who betrays him, there's Peter who denies him, all the other disciples who vanish and abandon him. And there's the chief priests and the scribes who scorn him and accuse him. There's Pilate who condemns him. And then there's also Simon of Cyrene who takes up his cross. And there's this acknowledgement, this invitation to see ourselves as, depending on the moment, to see ourselves as all of those people. Because there are moments when we betray Jesus. There are moments when we abandon Jesus, when we accuse Jesus. And there are moments, right? There are moments when those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, there are the moments when we pick up our cross. And we live into the discipleship that he outlines for us. But that's the story of what it means to be a disciple, is that we, depending on the moment, we can fall into any one of those. But this acknowledgement here at this moment that we are the whole cohort. Remember, so the Gospel of Mark, it's not only a proclamation of who Jesus is, and it starts with that. It says the good news of Jesus, the Son of God, right? It's a proclamation of who Jesus is as God in the flesh, but it's also a searing insight into who we are. It's a searing insight into who we are as flawed, sinful followers of the God who is perfect. And as we see a story like this, we see people mistreating Jesus so poorly. We realize that we, in fact, are just like them. We're the ones incapable of recognizing God in the flesh when he sits at the table with us and he serves us and he loves us. That we are the ones who will fight and die for Jesus until he starts leading us to places we didn't expect. that we're the ones who will walk with Jesus until he starts walking toward the cross. And then we jump ship and we join that whole cohort. And here there's the ridicule, the mocking is an invitation, a challenge to Jesus to do the exact opposite of what he invited his followers to do. They say, come down from the cross, when Jesus says, no, take up your cross. And they say, save yourself. And he invites us, he says, no, lose your life for my sake. And then here Jesus is, he's alone on the cross. He's suffering and dying for the ones mocking him and seeking his destruction. And we see ourselves as the ones doing that. And yet he journeys toward the cross nonetheless. What astonishing love. What a profound gift. Anytime I'm like preparing a sermon or something to share as encouragement for the church, I, you know, in the moments when I've got it together, I take time to simply ask God. I say, God, what do you want to say to your church? What do you want to say through your word, by your spirit, through me? You know, what's the message you have for us, your church? And this one, it was kind of an interesting where I felt this sense where God was trying to, you know, encourage me and just say, you know, what I want you to hear is that at this point in the Gospel of Mark, at this point when Jesus was abandoned and betrayed and accused and scorned and blasphemed, and he's journeying toward the cross and he ends up being crucified, I felt like God was saying, like, I want you to know that at this point in the story, it's turned into a one-way love story. It's a one-way love story. And this is the moment where the love of God was as powerful and palpable and self-sacrificial as it could possibly be. And he was offering that love, and he wasn't receiving it in kind. That at this point in the Gospel of Mark, it's a one-way love story. And here, I think it's so important to sit with that, to realize that this was a moment when God moved powerfully in love and didn't receive love in response. The Apostle Paul writes about this idea, this concept in Romans 5, where he says it isn't often someone will die for a righteous person, though maybe someone might dare to die for a good person, but God shows his love for us because while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That is the moment of grace. That is a grace-filled moment, a gift that can transform the universe. And that's a gift of God's love that transforms the universe. It's a love that was so powerful that it transformed the lives of the early church. The people were caught up in a way of life that held sacrificing on behalf of others at the center of who they were as a people. We see texts from Scripture, from other historical accounts, that the early church, it was this broad mosaic of humanity where rich people gave to the poor. Just because they were compelled to do that, because following Jesus meant they were brought into a love story that changed the universe. And so the rich would give to poor, the healthy would serve the sick. Pious and sinful people found themselves they found this sort of commonality at the cross as they both realized the love of Christ and their own sin. And people who occupied offices marred by injustice, people like tax collectors and soldiers, they left their posts of subjugation to pursue lives shaped by Christ's self-sacrifice. And this is a love, this is a gift that Jesus shows for you. And for me, it's a love that Jesus continues to offer for us. When we see ourselves in the text, we realize that we betray Jesus, we abandon Jesus, we accuse Jesus, we reject Jesus, we mock Jesus, we blaspheme Jesus, we crucify Jesus. And that's the moment when Jesus reminds us this is a one-way love story. At this point, when you're doing those, this is a one-way love story. And he responds to his crucifiers with love, and he responds to you and to me and to us with love. That in the face of betrayal, abandonment, accusation, rejection, mockery, blasphemy, and certain death, Jesus continues and he moves toward the cross, compelled by the love that spoke all of creation into being, the same love that sustains it now, and the same love that someday will redeem and renew all of it. That in the face of our unlove, Jesus still loves. And that he offers that love to you this morning. Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that ridiculous? Isn't that a gift that has the power to transform you? That as I consider all the ways that I betray and reject and crucify Jesus, there's that never-ending one-way love story that Jesus says, yeah, I still love you. I still love you. I still love you. And doesn't that make us want to turn toward Jesus? It makes us want to turn that kind of like one-way love story into a two-way love story where we respond to God with love from our heart, our soul, mind, and strength. That when when you receive a gift that is so good and true and right and beautiful, you cannot be the same. And to receive that gift of God's love that transcends everything, that changes us. And one of the most powerful ways that it changes us is that we realize when we've been loved so well, we just naturally love others. And how can we not extend the same kind of love and grace to those who hurt us or disagree with us? I'll say that again. How can we not extend the same kind of love and grace to those who hurt us or disagree with us? The one-way love that God offers us is so earth-shattering and so life-transforming that I think when we really receive that gift, when we really sit with it, we realize we're caught up into this now two-way love story between us and God. And then when God says, one of the best ways to love me is to love your neighbor. And we look around and we see that, yeah, but they've done this to me. And we realize, yeah, but think about all the things I did to God. Like, oh my gosh, God loves me regardless. There's this sort of natural shift. There's this natural extension of the gift that we have received. And yet, we still feel the temptations that Jesus was tempted with on the cross, right? The people are challenging him. They're saying, come down from your cross. How often are we tempted to come down from the cross that Jesus invites us to bear? Anytime I think we're invited to see ourselves at the center of the world, that's an invitation to come down from our cross. Anytime we're tempted to take rather than to give, that's an invitation, a temptation to come down from our cross. Anytime we're encouraged to make ourselves great at the expense of other people, that's an invitation to come down from our cross and save ourselves, when Jesus says, no, stay up on that cross. These are the temptations to live in opposition to the way of Christ. And Jesus says, no, I invite you to be like Simon of Cyrene. Remember, Simon serves the purpose of that ideal disciple. Why? Why does he serve? Because in the text of Mark 15, he carries the cross of Jesus. Jesus had challenged and invited all his disciples to carry their cross, and they all bail. They all abandon him. Some betray him and some deny him. And we do that. That's what we do. And yet, as all were doing that and leaving Jesus as he marched towards the cross, Simon is the one who ends up embodying the role of the true disciple. And he carries the cross of Jesus. He accepts his invitation to carry his cross. And Jesus invites us to do the same. There's a song we're going to sing this morning, and it's a powerful one. And the refrain, the sort of phrase that's repeated over and over, is the title of the song. It says, "How can I keep from singing. And it's this reflection of the ways that God has broken into our lives with this one-way love. He's broken into our lives in a way that changes everything. It transforms us from the inside out to the point where we have no other response than to just sing out in praise. The third verse has this reflection where it says, "The peace of Christ makes fresh my heart, a fountain ever springing. All things are mine since I am his. How can I keep from singing?" May the peace of Christ make fresh your heart this morning. May you find yourself overwhelmed by this one-way love story. And may the one-way love story turn into a two-way love story. May we find ourselves in taking up Jesus' invitation to bear our cross. May we live in such a way that we embody the way of Jesus in love toward our neighbor. May you see the way in which Jesus pursues you with his love. May his love renew you this morning. And may you accept this invitation to carry your cross as you help bring life to others. Again, may the peace of Christ make fresh your heart, and may you find yourself singing out of the response of receiving that love from Jesus this morning. Amen.